Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the TopNut MCT1 technical webinar. We've got two hosts today, Werner van Niekerk and Brice Cadets. Just to give you a brief introductory background on these two speakers, Brice Cadets from Gympie is a very well-known name in the Australian macadamia industry, and he has been involved in agriculture his whole professional career. Brice considers himself very fortunate to have been under the mentorship of the well-known Ian McConaughey. And Brice was also involved in the development of MCT1, where he coordinated the DNA sampling and testing of MCT1 cyanwood for distribution for nurseries. Throughout his impressive career, he received numerous accolades, including the Norm Greber Award for his major contribution to the Australian macadamia industry, and also the Order of Australia Medal to recognize his service, which is worthy of this particular recognition. He is currently an independent horticultural and agricultural advisor. Then we have Werner van Niekerk. Werner ventured into the macadamia industry in 2009. He started off as a procurement officer and then eventually started to focus more on the technical aspects of macadamia cultivation for Agristar Holdings Group in 2017, where he currently holds the position as Technical Group Director. He has since built the industry benchmark Future Tree Nurseries, together with AgriGrow Investment Partners, of which he's also a director. And as a director of TopNut, Werner's main responsibility is to establish the technical aspects for each nut that TopNut manages globally. Sorry, I omitted to introduce myself. I'm Annelie Bosman. I am the General Business Developer for TopNut. So I've introduced our two speakers. Just a few administrative points. This webinar will be recorded and the link will be sent out to you at a later stage. There is a question and answer function where you are more than welcome to type in any questions. Due to the time constraint, we may possibly not get to all the questions, but I've got all your email addresses and your contact details. So if we don't get to your question, it will be answered after the webinar. So over to you, Werner and Brice.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Annelie, for the introduction. Yes, looking forward to the discussion today. Even though it's short, it's long overdue. I think it was quite important from my point of view to get an independent opinion and background on MCT1, that it comes from the horse's mouth, if one can say it like that. So Brice, thank you for joining us. I know there's a time difference, but luckily we caught you before you're going to bed, down under. Welcome.
Thank you, Werner. And it's very nice to be able to occupy a chair and talk to like-minded people along my way. So I'm speaking to the group today from Gympie in southeast Queensland, 2 hours north of Brisbane, for anyone who doesn't know where that is. And most importantly, the centre of the macadamia universe. I was explaining before that it's only 30 kilometres from where I sit that the largest remnant deposit of integrifolia macadamias, the wild trees, exists today. So we're right in the centre of the action here.
Excellent to know. As I said, we can debate about the epicenter, but that's a thing for over a beer. To jump right in on some of the agenda points, Brice, if we look at the history of the MCT1, if you can maybe elaborate a little bit. Ian McConaughey played a major role, and I think before we start, I think it's quite important to acknowledge his contribution to the MCT1. Without his contribution and attention to detail and drive, there wouldn't have been the MCT1 today. So if you would like to elaborate a little bit more on that and where you joined the team and how do you fit in with Ian McConaughey's, the team back then?
Okay, happy to do that. Thanks, Werner. And your overview of Ian McConaughey is very accurate, and particularly in relation to MCT1. Had not have been for his diligence, it wouldn't exist. The story began a long time ago, almost 30 years ago. And Ian was gifted 250 trial grafted trees they were surplus trees to the DPI, Department of Primary Industries. They gave them to Ian and told him if he wished he should plant them out and monitor them, and if anything came of them, it belonged to him. As Ian was wont to do, he did plant them all out, created the worst macadamia orchard nightmare in the world. He had 80 different varieties, and when it came to harvest, it was an absolute nightmare. But over a period of time, Ian cut out the varieties that were obviously not going to go anywhere. And cut a long story short, he ended up with 3 cultivars that he thought might have potential. And as it turned out, the one of those that he selected to carry forward, was then known as M416. And after its registration for plant breeders' rights, the name was changed to MCT1. So that's how it came about. Ian, the MCT1 didn't go through any of the normal trial scenarios, but it had the ultimate trial, because the trees were planted in a block of other trees. They weren't treated any different. They had to do the job with minimal assistance. And yes. Ian went to those trees every year, harvested nuts, dehusked them, observed their characteristics. And at the end of 19 years of observation, he concluded that they had no major faults. The quality of the kernel was good, and it had the potential to be pursued as a viable alternative variety for the industry.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. Yeah, thanks for that. And Ian, I think most of the people that's been in the industry for a long time knows Ian's contribution to the macadamia industry worldwide.
I'm a babe in the woods compared to Ian, but Ian gave me my first job in the industry. That's how we got associated. I started work with Suncoast Gold Macadamias in 2002, and it was Ian who was instrumental in giving me that role. So that's how we became connected.
Okay. So this site where Ian planted the 250 different cultivars, is that in Gympie? Was it in Gympie or Bundaberg?
Yes, it's in an area called Wolvi, which is about 20 kilometres to the east of Gympie. Slightly southeast, towards the coast. Gympie is 50 kilometres off the coast. Yes. And the Wolvi area is slightly elevated, a little bit above Gympie height, but not so far as to make a big difference. Ian had an orchard there of 6,000 trees, and that's where he planted those 250 trees.
Okay, so from the 250 initial trees, there were like 3 possible selections. MCT1 was one, and the other 2, what happened with the other 2? If you can quickly just give some feedback.
Okay, those trees still exist. In fact, Ian was out there yesterday. I spoke to him this morning. One of them, which shows promise, interesting. We were discussing before, Werner, that you never understand macadamias. He was out there this morning, and the second variety, which could have some interest, those nuts were all on the ground and buried in mud. It's been very wet here for the last 3 months, and they are all absized and on the ground in the mud. So he's picked up a sample, taken them home, washed them, dehusking them, and he's going to have a look at see how they go. But he was startled, and I'm surprised, because technically they shouldn't have been absized, but there you are. Just when you think you understand macadamias, they throw you a curved ball. The other variety has been planted by a couple of growers. The one thing we know about it, it's a very strong pollinator, of MCT1, and that's one of the reasons was planted. However, you've got to temper that with the fact that MCT1, it's a little bit like a war, if you like, or a harlot, excuse the language. It can be pollinated by almost everything. We've never seen a failed crop of MCT1 in any orchard yet. And they're pollinated very readily by most other cultivars.
And that's great news. I think we will get to flower timing a little bit later, and go into more detail. Okay, so that's good news that at least for the growers that's attending here, that there might be one more cultivar coming out of.
It is possible. We are looking at that. So.
Yeah, in the future. Yeah. And that's nice. Okay, so the original site was close by, the altitude and stuff similar to Gympie, and yeah, as you said, Gympie is not flat. You're always walking against some slope or something, so I think that is quite important for the farmers. You haven't seen, I'll jump somewhere a little bit. You haven't seen any like row orientation that yields different or different growth patterns on Helios areas.
You're pushing me into a corner now. I wouldn't call it a rogue reaction, but we have seen different reactions. But that's not restricted to MCT1 either. Last season, just at the beginning of abscission, we were up in Bundaberg and looked at 2 blocks of MCT1s. One was planted north-south, the other was planted east-west. And asked me to quote you which one fell first, but one of those directions was substantially abscising and the other direction hadn't started. So that's the best answer I can give.
Thanks.
Like
that's
most macadamias, if they get a weather condition that flicks a switch, they'll do something different.
So to go a little bit further on with the then the MCT1 was selected. Ian gave it to the Macadamia Conservation Trust, if I'm not mistaken.
He did.
And what happened from there?
He and Jan took out PBR, and the PBR was achieved, and Ian and Jan signed that over then to the Conservation Trust, and all of the royalties that are earned off MCT1 go to the trust. Ian and Jan have not taken 1 cent of those royalties, which is an amazing thing. And Ian's his big thing has been to see the remnant wild macadamias conserved. That's his big issue in life. So now the funding is available to make sure that can happen.
Okay, so just to clarify that the royalties goes into the trust. The trust looks after all the wild macadamias in Australia, but there's no breeding program as such going on.
What, in relation to MCT1 or?
Yes, there's no. Ian is not busy with some new varieties in a breeding program somewhere.
He'd love to be, but this man's 87 years old.
but yeah, he's got a lot of energy. Hopefully we all end up there.
He's lost interest in breeding. Now look, you know, Ian, I've got to be careful what I say here. That the MCT1 was not included, and it's a bit political, I can understand it, in the official trials of the Australian breeding program. Yes. Because it's a private deal. It had nothing to do with anybody in the government who had anything to do with taking the money to breed new varieties.
All good.
The MCT1 is featured strongly and has even been accepted now by the industry as the benchmark variety for the official trial.
Yeah. If you have to guess, how many hectares to date have been planted of MCT1 in Oz?
Well, we know that over 1 million trees have been produced.
Okay.
1 million MCT1 trees. That's in the last 3 to 4 years.
Oh, okay. So it's definitely the main variety that's being planted in Oz now. Rejuvenation.
Yeah, in Queensland, it constitutes 1/3 of the trees that have gone in the ground over the last 3 or 4 years. Now,
Okay.
we're not sure about New South Wales. There has been a lot planted in New South Wales as well, but it may not be 1/3.
Okay, so to jump on to the meat and potatoes, from there on, it was commercialized PBR, and then it went into different trial sites in Australia. So if you can maybe just tell the viewers or the attendees that why and where was this selected, and just to make up the breakdown of those trials, just high level. Pollinators, a little bit here and there. Brice, please.
So I should make it clear there were no official trials.
Yes, yes, that's good. So it was farmers that wanted to plant it, that had a relationship with Ian, and they agreed on something.
It came about by mostly one farmer being very observant. And he had trees across the road from him that belonged to one of Australia's biggest orchard managers. And he went across and inspected those trees and looked at some nuts and opened some nuts that he didn't know what they were. He went to the owner of that particular orchard and said, could he take some wood from there? Which he did. And that would happen to be M416, or known now as MCT1. And that started the ball sort of rolling. But preceding that, Hickler Park had planted 100 from wood that Ian McConaughey gave Phil Zadro about 24 or 25 years ago. And they're the ones we discovered when we went to chat with Hickler Park. Another orchard had planted 2,000, I beg your pardon, 1,000 that were not all MCT1s. They were mixed with another cultivar, but we later on did all the DNA in that block, and there were about 600 MCT1s. So we were able to assess those, and they are now about 17 or 18-year-old, those trees. I can tell you that Ian and I were in that block last Friday, and that block's owned now by Starman Webster, who are a big conglomerate. You're probably aware of them. And I have to say the crop on those trees was just fantastic. And they're 17 or 18 years old. They'd have had 22, 25 kilos on each tree. They're looking very good. A couple of other private growers planted 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 tree blocks quite early in the piece. Those trees now are 7, 8, 9-year-old, and they are performing strongly. In terms of pollinators, I made the comment before, there is almost nothing that we can identify that doesn't pollinate them. Really strange. And I can just list a few off. We did some pollination tests to determine what did pollinate them. And I can tell you that 246s and H2 seedlings, 741, A16, A203, A29, A38, 344, 816, and Dado are all efficient pollinators of MCT1. And then there's some random pollinators as well. And just to highlight how open they are to pollination, in a New South Wales block where we tested, there is one random cultivar that's partly Dado and partly something else, and it was located as a pollinator in MCT1. Okay. And that was one tree. So they're very open to pollinating. Now, having said that, they self-pollinate very poorly. Their self-pollination is lousy. So they do need to be cross-pollinated, but all the evidence suggests that the pollinators don't have to be next door. I mean, we've got blocks where you've got someone from TopNut here in Australia who we're visiting with on Thursday, and I'll take him to a block where the pollinators are 20 and 30 rows away, and the pollination is still very effective. So they are readily pollinated by a host of other cultivars.
No, that's good news. We as South Africans, if I can speak on our behalf, our flower period is quite stretched over a longer time than the Aussies. So
Yep.
it might be more relevant to us to find a suitable or more suitable cultivars that flower closer to the MCT1. I think what we've seen with the couple of 2-year-old trees that we've got is it flowers middle to late, if I want to call it, like a 70% to 80% time of the season. So it's before our Beaumont and A4s, round about there. Is my guesstimate at this stage.
Right.
This variety will be planted quite across Africa, Malawi, Zambia, wherever and the farmers must just keep that in mind. We need a flower to flower at the same time to have at least cross-pollination.
To be on the safe side, I agree. And I don't encourage anybody to deliberately use something that flowers at a totally different time, but our observations are that even the slightest overlapping of flowering is good enough to provide pollination. It's interesting.
If you have to guess or put a percentage to it, how many percent pollinators will you put in a MCT1 block? Difficult, sorry, but I know the pollinators, as you just said, came from 50 or 30 meters. But if we want to design it from new beginnings, scratch,
yep.
How would you advise the growers, knowing what you've seen over the years, how to plan their orchards?
I would just thinking about the orchards that are being planted with large numbers, big orchards now going in, 5 to 8 rows of MCT1, and then the pollinator rows. And depending on, I mean, most of the pollinators here, if I talk about Bundaberg, because that's the big area here where many of them are being planted, yes. They're planting MCT1, A16s and Dados. I mean, there's a 1,500 hectare planting going in now, and that's the 3 varieties that'll be in there. We know that they all cross-pollinate beautifully, so they could plant them out at 5 or 6 or 8 or 10 rows alternative, and they'd be quite okay. I wouldn't suggest going beyond 10 rows to maximise. Even having
so
said
we're talking
that,
about a 20%, a 20-25%. We're comfortable with that as a pollination percentage.
Absolutely. Yep.
Okay. To jump in, any climatic conditions, just to finish that off, that topic. You haven't seen differences in any climatic altitude or anything that comes to mind that you've come across over the years?
But you can't validly tie them to climatic conditions. We've already agreed that macadamias from season to season do odd things, and MCT1 is no different. Okay. We thought they might have been. We thought they might have been the ultimate silver bullet, but the reality is they behave just like most macadamias do. I've seen nothing to indicate. We know early in the piece there were some planted up on the Atherton tablelands. Now, for other reasons, those trees ultimately were taken out, but as young trees, they were performing equally as well as young trees down in Bundaberg and further south, though there was no visible difference. They were very precocious, as they are here in Bundaberg South, putting on their first nuts at 2 years of age, and normally providing their first crop before they're 3 years of age. So I've seen nothing that would make me think that there is a climatic variation that would be of concern.
Okay, no, all good. It's just to relate back for us. On the altitude, as I said earlier, we know in general Aussie is flat. It's an island. So if we go up into Africa, we're looking at altitudes of 1,500 meters.
Yep.
And then we've got the KwaZulu-Natal coast that's quite flat, 50 whatever to 100 meters. So it's quite a wide range of altitude that we're looking at to planting these cultivars. To jump to the rootstock, if you can quickly tell us a little bit more about what rootstocks are being used in Oz, and if there's any experimental rootstocks that you've used MCT1 on, and rootstocks in general.
Okay, look, the favoured rootstock here, and I think most are aware of it, is H2. They have been the favoured rootstock, and the Australian industry is based on H2 rootstock. So that's been used for 60 years now here in Australia. And
Yes.
it's only in the last 10 years, I guess, that some Beaumont that was trialled, and they have been accepted favourably in some quarters, but not in all. There's an indicator that perhaps performance can be slightly enhanced on Beaumont rootstock, but there's not enough work done on it yet, and not enough numbers out there to really give that credibility over a long period of time.
Okay.
So as far as other varieties of rootstock was mentioned before, Phil Zadro maybe trialling A268s, and I can relate to that because there is a very old rootstock trial up in Bundaberg that interestingly is a bit hush-hush because it was not funded. It was funded by the citrus industry secretly. So nobody talks about it. But I believe A268 seemed to show up favourably in that rootstock trial. So that could be why Phil might be using A268s.
Okay, coming out of that.
Yeah.
Again, last question on climate. Some guys, the macadamia industry has been expanding in Southern Africa, and we've been planting wherever we've got an open piece of land. So any comment on, does it do well in very cold areas and very warm areas? Just to questions that came in that we're discussing.
Okay, there's one really valid comment that we can contribute there. I mean, again, the cultivar's only been tested severely on a very limited basis. However, the orchard that has the largest number of MCT1s that are now 8-9 year old, those orchards were subject to severe drought during 2023. And I spoke to the guy who runs those orchards, and the favoured cultivar here in Australia for toughness has been Dado since time immemorial. And interestingly, that was another one of Ian McConaughey's favourite selections, but that's another story. But yes. That manager informed me that, to his view, MCT1s were tougher than Dado. They came out of the drought conditions in much better condition than anything else, including Dado. So that's one thing I can tell you.
Oh, that's nice. That's nice. It's just to give the farmers a better perspective of where can they clear land and where can they plant.
Yeah, and I think added to that, there are MCT1s planted on some marginal country, pretty hard, tough country that if you went back 30 years ago wouldn't have been planted to macadamias. But, you know, there's been the scurry to plant them wherever you can. And macadamias, because Bundaberg's got this magnificent flat terrain that is so economical to farm. So anywhere there's a square metre that hasn't got a tree on it, that's been planted, so to speak. MCT1's planted there on some marginal country, and they do amazingly well. That's the best I can tell you.
Great, because I foresee Africa has got a lot of expansion potential, and not always having enough water, and maybe it's something to look at for those growers. If I don't have sufficient water, is to plant them and live on a 75% maybe or a 50% irrigation requirement. If we go to, sorry, yes?
I'll say it's obviously risk associated with that.
No, for sure. Sure.
You know, if there's shortfalls in opportunity for the tree, it may not do as well as it's projected to. It's a simple
Yes,
fact.
no, for sure. I will never advise it, but I personally won't plant a macadamia.
No, the boundary gets pushed.
But I don't speak on behalf of everyone. So you get a lot of cowboy farmers. I didn't say that. So to jump over to the actual production, I think that's where a lot of the guys are interested. I think we've covered the length of the flower timing. What I've seen from the industry, the Aussie industry, is that you also a middle-late flower timing. Even if it's your 6 weeks, even with that, you also on the same stage. And I think what I've seen from Macklins, those couple of trees, is it's the same time. It's just, how can I say, more spaced out in South Africa or Africa, for that matter. Then I think the industry has changed a lot on the marketing side. And it's very important to know that the oil, the taste, everything like that is solid and that it can be sold going forward. It's a long-term investment, as you know, and I'm glad to hear that all the tests have been done and that has been accepted by the marketers and the public to consume.
So,
sorry?
Just on that, Werner, I did dig up, and you might have seen them. They're in some official stuff from the trials that were done by the government. And there's a trial block which had MCT1s close handy to the official trial. So they pulled some MCT1s off that and tested them. And they had MCT1 pollinated by A4. The total kernel recovery was 46% and oil was 77%.
Excellent.
They had MCT1s pollinated by A16. The kernel recovery was 50% and 75.8% oil. So they're pretty startling results.
That's beautiful.
There is no guarantee that the average Joe is going to get that out of a block on the farm, but it's a significant little bit of work that we've been privileged to receive.
I think the one part is the quality and the second part is the yield. If you can maybe just, out of your travels during the years, you said earlier you've seen crop on year 2 and a sizable crop in year 4, and you mentioned 23-year-old trees bearing 25 to 30 kilograms a tree. I think because currently where we're sitting, we've got a very small pool of genetic cultivars, if you want to call it like that, in South Africa. And some of the cultivars, there's question marks about when they get older, they run out of steam in producing. So it's nice to hear that right through the spectrum from year 4 to 23 that you've seen, there has not been a failed season without a crop. So I think that's one excellent attribute to this cultivar.
Can I just ask Werner to help my thinking? What are your main cultivars over there? What are we mainly comparing?
Yes, A4 and Beaumont and 816 is probably, is the most planted in South Africa, those 3 varieties. Yes, so sorry, I missed you a little bit. Do you is that what you want to compare it to? Yeah,
that's fine. I was just in my own mind, so I know what we're comparing MCT1 with.
So let's talk about an 8-year-old. Oh, sorry. Let's talk about an 8-year-old block. What's the yield that you've been seeing? If we look at a 45 to a 50% crack out, and what yield have you been getting from an 8-year-old tree?
Well, I could quote you specific yields on 6-year-old trees that were accurately measured, and the yield was 1,534 kilos of kernel per hectare.
Okay, times
That's
45.
That's about that's about 4.5 tonne of in-shell at 10% at 6 years of age.
Yeah, I thought it was a little bit more, but yeah, excellent. So, okay, years 6, we're talking 4 to 5 tons already, eh?
Yeah, yep. Now, those trees were very well looked after and encouraged to give that sort of
Okay.
response.
Proper farming, attention to
You know,
detail.
Yeah, well managed and on pretty reasonable soil.
Okay, so because it's very important, Brice, that we manage the expectation. So
Yeah.
it's like anything in life, whatever you put in is what you'll get out. And farmers must not think that they plant them and they go and sit back and this tree will give them 50% more income per block than the normal cultivar.
That's right. And they'll be looking for long-range missiles to shoot me if that happens. So, in addition to that, they are very precocious, MCT1. And
Yes.
as I had mentioned and we've discussed, 2-year-old trees regularly flowering. In fact, if I think about it, I can't recall seeing 2-year-old trees that hadn't flowered. You might get the odd one sprinkled through a planting, but they're very precocious. And by the time they're 3-year-old, they're always carrying a crop. And their first crop, I would estimate, would normally be between 500 grams and a kilo of in-shell. And then they rapidly increase from there.
Okay, I can agree. So I can only give my opinion on what I've seen, but in our nursery, I've seen them outgrown any other cultivar in the nursery.
They're like weeds.
It's actually scary.
They like weeds.
So they're very precocious.
Yes, they are.
So the farmers must please do understand that growth comes from energy, and they need a little bit more TLC and food, like you said earlier, and water requirements and stuff like that. So farmers do need to understand that you don't get higher yields, better crackouts with feeding or on the same nutritional program than the normal cultivars that we know in South Africa.
Yeah, I think that's a very reasonable view of the issue. From what I'm seeing, though, I think that they're a moderate frame tree. They're not a large tree at all, which is a bonus. They're much easier to manage. The tree stands fairly open, so they're easy to spray and look after. The temptation would be to throw a lot of nitrogen at them. And I mean, that's what destroyed orchards in Australia early in the piece. We know that they respond well to biology. If you can get those bugs working and look after your soil health, that's where the energy comes from.
Yes.
And not that you can deplete or delete nitrogen, you can't, but there are more issues in nutrition than just nitrogen. So it's just a note of caution. Lots of nitrogen will put lots of leaf on, not necessarily lots.
But we don't sell leaves, eh? We don't sell branches.
We don't sell leaves. No, you're right.
We don't sell water, we sell kernel. And it's so excellent. I've always been on this path or journey to tell people we need to stop comparing dry nut in shell. You know, we're farming a 1 ton per hectare or a 2 ton per hectare club. That's the aim, is to get the kernel. And on that topic, I know there's different ways of cracking and factory and stuff like that. But the wholes versus the pieces, as I said earlier, the market has changed quite a lot. And they're getting finicky till we expand the demand going forward. But for the interim, for the farmers, can you just maybe tell us a little bit more about the style spread?
Yeah, look, my view on that from what I've seen, MCT1's normally not that different to the higher whole kernel varieties of other cultivars.
Like
Probably,
8.6.
Yeah. And particularly the crackers that are still in use in Australian factories, they're not kind crackers. You know, they're a bit rough and tough.
Okay.
I've seen MCT1s cracked with other newer style crackers that are much more gentle and 80 to 90% holes, but that's a whole different ball game.
Okay, so the potential is there, Brice.
The potential is there, but
we
again,
just need to talk in general.
we do. Look, normally it's around 45 to 55% holes, somewhere in that area, maybe 60 on a good day, and we note that will vary too according to the time in the season.
Yes.
The early season stuff that's carrying a little bit more moisture, it tends to produce slightly higher hole kernels. As the season goes on and the kernel dries out, you get less holes.
Okay. Coming back to your pruning technique, I think that is always one thing between the Aussies and the South Africans.
There is no technique in Australia.
Thanks for that. I didn't want to say that. We all know you use the all cut machine with the blades, and but tree training, like the experts call it. What is your advice? Luckily, the tree is open by itself, like you say, so that's the advantage to get more horizontal branches. So what is your take on the pruning?
Look, it's not possible to be critical of what the large orchards are doing. They plant the tree, it comes up to chest high. They bring in a flat cut, take the top off. Then they give it another 6 months or so, or 10 months, and they come through and they take another cut off the top. And then the tree's on its own. Now, there are tens of thousands of trees that have been done that way, that are performing perfectly normally.
Yes.
And those growers wouldn't even think about doing it any other way, mainly because of their numbers. I mean, when you're looking after a couple of 100,000 trees, labour for us is not cheap. And to go in and do that tree training manually and create the vase shape and all the rest of it, the only place I've seen, and this doesn't apply only to MCT1s, where tree selective pruning or training, if you like, is used, as if there's perceived to be some sort of issue developing and they want to correct what the tree's doing. They
like a lump removal or something like that.
Yeah, that's right. But apart from that, it's straight off the top. 2 cuts.
So, sorry, would it be safe to say that with the necessary hand intervention, there's maybe possible upside on your yield that you can get? Or wouldn't you go that far?
Yeah, I would. And I don't think anyone would deny that. The process that's adapted is because of the numbers, the volume. And we haven't got labour at a cost that would allow us to do that.
No, we fully understand that from a South African point of view, and that's why we tongue in the cheek type of thing. So we know that. We also don't try to ranch, if you want to call that word. Every tree needs to get its individual attention. We try. Let's just quantify. We try. So with the hectares getting more.
What I would say is, if you want to MCT1s, if you want to treat them individually, they're quite easy to do it with, because they are open.
Yes.
It's reasonably easy to select what branches you're going to take.
Yeah, to get your uprights out and stuff like that.
It might be just time, Werner, if I could just mention something that's come to mind. If you want to talk about how hardy and how tough these trees are, we had trees that were approaching about 18 months old in the Glasshouse Mountains. They got hit last year, 18 months ago, with a savage hailstorm. And that hailstorm stripped 60 to 70% of the bark off those trees. Now, the grower, I went down there and the grower said, what can you do with it? If anything, he said, I've got to pull them out. I was aware of a couple of things that might assist him, so he agreed to have a go at that. And these are all MCT1s. I've got to tell you, those trees have made an amazing recovery, and those trees this year have got some nuts on them, which is just astonishing. Yeah.
Well, that's ideal. That's excellent.
Yep.
Okay, thanks, Brice. I don't have any more questions from my side. I think I'll quickly talk about the South African industry. Is there final comments from your side that you would like to mention or highlight for the people from the Aussie perspective on MCT1?
Look, I think worthwhile mentioning is that one of the issues that's improved their popularity over here is the nurseries love them, because the average take from grafting is about 90%.
Yes.
You've seen their ability to really grow rapidly in the nursery, but the grafting takes are also very strong, which is a really good sign from any perspective. You know, if the graft struggles, that you gain the idea that the whole tree might struggle. But the nurseries do love them, and even though the nurseries hate having to deal with the royalty, because it's a lot of extra paperwork for them, the fact that they get such good takes encourages them not to resist MCT1s. That's
no,
one
for
of
sure.
the things.
We've experienced the same. In our nursery, the take rate is quite high, higher than 90.
Yeah, well,
It's a good bet. Thanks, Brice. Appreciate it. If I'll quickly jump over to the South African MCT1. So, future tree nurseries have the exclusive right to propagate MCT1s from ANFIC, and so that contract has been signed, and we've done the first batch. So, in the first batch, what we tried to establish was some areas, some screening blocks in Africa, Southern Africa, if you want to call it like that. So just to give the growers some updates, we've planted, or in the process of planting, in Malawi and Zambia, and then there's South Africa that we're planting in. Annelie, you must please jump in if I forget about a farmer or a country or area, please. So, and then in South Africa, we as AgriStar have planted quite a lot in the Lowveld Mpumalanga area, and we're looking at the George area and then north and south coast of KwaZulu-Natal. So that's where we're currently standing. I know there's a couple of trees in Zanin as well. So just to see if we can pick up any difference in growth and yield, but it's a commercial cultivar, and I think that's quite important to note today, that you know, the trees going into Africa is not 20 or 100 trees. It's in the thousands that's going up. So the guys are taking the risk and believing in what we hear from the Aussies, and we're going flat taps and planting them. From an agri-side point of view, I can talk only on behalf of us. We've planted like 13,000 in one of our new development blocks. We've got an intake pollinator blocks, and we've got a hybrid pollinator blocks. So just to explain that, and we also on about a 25 to a 30% pollination on either of those blocks, on the intakes or the hybrids. So that's where we currently are, and that was my advice to date, is to not have less than 30% of pollinators, 25, with these new varieties.
You can't be shot for being safe, and that's the smart thing to do.
I took that angle, exactly. We know an A4 and an A16 is bearing, so if the guys have to kill me, at least 30% of the block is still bearing.
The other thing that's worth mentioning, when we did the testing of pollinators, we tested specifically with 741s and 246s and got 99% for those. With Dados, 97%, A203s 100%, A16s and A203s mixed 100%. And then in New South Wales, we tested with A38 and the the DPI new DPI R variety and got 94%, and the other 6% were filled with 344, 816, and 741. But we did one other test. We reversed it. We had A203s in a block and tested them for pollination. They were 100% pollinated by MCT1.
So excellent. So let's stop at this. So you say it's a good pollinator tree as well?
Yeah, absolutely. If that's any indicator, A203s were 100%.
So if you look at the parent, you take the nut, you look at the parent DNA or whatever they do these days. Okay, that's interesting. So it's a good pollinator as well. So I think that's one advantage that we've got currently in the macadamia industry. If you compare it to the apples, our pollinator is actually a tree, and it can bear and it can give you income. Whereas in the apples, what I've seen is some of the pollinators just gets used as a pollinator, and then it gets stripped and left on the ground.
The end of its useful life.
Yes. So it's only used as a pollinator. So it's great to hear that you can reverse it actually. So that means that where we're going currently, and I'm a strong believer of that, is we're farming macadamia nuts again and not cultivars. So if you've got intakes, you stay to intakes, and hybrids, you plant hybrids. You mix them and sort them, and then you crack them. So I'm all for mixed.
Another thing that might be of interest, I did ask Ian what the background to MCT1 is, and it's been determined that it's from a cultivar that old Henry Bell produced, and ultimately it was culled, cultivar called M61, and the likely pollinator parent was A4. That's almost certainly the background to MCT1.
Okay, yes, no, the Bell breeding program, yes. Okay, guys, so we've sold then all the MCT1 trees currently. There's nothing left. We've imported some new budwood, and that was grafted about 2 to 3 weeks ago, if I'm not mistaken, in our nursery. And that will be ready after the winter in 25, September, October, around about there. I like a bigger, stronger tree, so 2 to 3 flushes. So yeah, you can talk to Annelie or myself going forward on the order front. I'm not going to go into more detail. That's not the reason for the webinar today. Annelie, we've got a question and answer session. So if you want to please lead that, and the conclusion, and then the PowerPoint presentation from there, please.
Sure. Thank you, Brice and Werner. That was really informative. Thank you very much for both your input. I received 3 questions from the participants. Just referring back, Brice, you spoke about a 6-year-old block where you measured yield. Just some uncertainty. What was the block population and the yield exactly, nut in shell per hectare?
Well, it was calculated back to kernel, not nut in shell. I don't have I can't give you that. Look, I'll take the question on notice. The interest was in the kernel per hectare, and that's what was quoted. The nut in shell might have been quoted, but I'd have to look back at the actual figures to see if that was the case.
Okay, no problem. We can revisit that question at later.
Because I don't know off the top of my head what the kernel recovery was, so I can't quickly work it back. But I'll find out for you and let you know.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, not a problem.
As close as it can get. 1.5 tons of kernel, I think. Sorry, I missed that one. And then times 45%, or just need to work it back. You'll get as close as damn it.
Yep.
Thanks. Then a question regarding tree spacing. Has there been some research done on the ideal spacing? I know soil conditions and climatic conditions and everything also play a role. But is there such a thing as the ideal tree spacing for MCT1 that you have found?
I don't know whether we can say ideal, but the tree is a moderate frame tree. in Australia, it performs about the same tree size as A16, and even a little more compact than A203s. So it's moderate frame. The most of the plantings out here would be 8x4. I'd say with MCTs, 8 metres is probably enough. But if I was doing it and I had the land, I would plant it 9 by 4.5. Again, just building in a little safety factor, and the knowledge that once the trees interlock between the trees down the row, that space becomes darker and potentially doesn't yield as high. Haven't seen a lot of evidence of that because the tree does stand open, and that doesn't seem to interfere overly with the productivity. But 8x4 works for them here, and I would think 9 by 4.5 would be a magic spacing.
Thank you. And then also you mentioned 1 million trees in Australia, but now I need to do that calculation. If your standard planting is 8x4, can you more or less give an indication of the number of hectares in Australia on
Well,
the
that's
MCT one?
312 per hectare. So if you quick work that out,
Yeah,
312.
nearly 3,000 hectares or something.
Round figures, 3,000 hectares.
Okay,
And
thanks.
there's a planting just going in now, which is 1,500 hectares, and 500 of that will be MCT1s. So those numbers are expanding quite rapidly.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. I've got one last question. No, sorry, there's another one. Next question, TKR and long-term yield for MCT1.
Okay. TKR, the lowest I've seen is 38%, and that was on very young trees. And this doesn't, my observation, this doesn't only apply to MCT1s. I find that if you get very young trees with a fairly heavy crop, the tree battles to have the energy to really develop the optimum amount of kernel. So that was the situation there. The next season, the TKR jumped 42%. Ian McConaughey's observations over 17 or 18 or 19 years were between 40 and 46%.
Right.
Okay, thank you. In your experience, sorry, no, you continue.
That question was just partially answered. And I think the question is also the trend of the yielding expectancy over the years.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, I can only repeat.
You answered it quite a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, our observations are, and the reports back from the field, is that the tree continues to give strong results. And as I said, we were out last Friday and looking at trees that are 17 or 18 years old now that would have had 25 kilos a tree. And that was on marginal country. That's really tough country. And the trees are doing well. I'll never forget Phil Zadro's comment. We had a field day at his Canyon orchard, which is an old CSR orchard that Phil bought in another lifetime ago. And a lot of it's pretty mongrel soil, pretty ordinary. And Phil scratched his chin and said, well, I don't understand it, but he said, I get my strongest crops off my worst soil. And I think it's an important thing to note because the good results are coming from farmers who've studied what their soil does and develop their nutrition program to suit the soil. And some of those in Bundaberg that have done the very best at this caper are those who are vegetable growers, small crop growers. Bundaberg was big in tomatoes and small crops. Those guys understood how to trickle feed nutrition, and they took that information and that technique and brought it into macadamias, and they've been super successful at doing that. And we know that, you know, trickle feeding nutrition with Max, they just love it. If we think about macadamias in their native environment in the scrub, they don't get any added nutrition at all. They've got to get their nutrition out of what their roots are producing and foraging for. and it's a slow, minuscule, continuous trickle of nutrition. And that's what macadamia is like. If you can duplicate that, you get a good result.
Thank you. Moving on to disease, insect, pest susceptibility and specific kernel defects. In your experience, is there any susceptibility to any of these factors?
Look, again, Ian's observations were over that long period of time, and most of the reports that have come back, no major defects. You'd have to say that. Having said that, they're not immune to insect attack, and we had a large orchard in which is 100 k's north of Gympie last year, where they missed a spraying, and fruit spotting bug did cause damage, and they're a thin shell variety. So if a bug with a sharp proboscis comes along, they're going to cause some damage, and they did. I think their loss was about 6% nut in shell. So insect attack can happen. They don't seem to be prone to husk spot or husk rot because they seldom form in bunches. They form on doubles and triples and quadruples on a raceme, and don't assemble in tight bunches. However, I have to say that Ian and I took samples last week. It hasn't stopped raining here since the middle of November. We were told by our experts that El Nino was coming. We don't know when it's coming, but hasn't arrived yet. And it has been extremely wet. And Ian and I took some samples, and we have observed in MCT1s a low level of pre-germination of nuts still on the tree. So that's the first time we've noticed that. But the season has been exceptional, and certainly a season that if that was ever going to show up, it would certainly show up this year. So we're not completely bulletproof.
Yes, I think to jump in there for the conclusion is that the growers must please understand that this is not a silver bullet, and it's always managing the expectation. So from a breeding, sorry, Brice, from a breeding point of view, this cultivar's got the genetic potential to give you higher yields and better crackouts and a better return, and that's the basics. We can put figures or percentages around it, but that's not what we want to do. We want to tell the guys that there is a genetic potential, and if they farm it correctly and give it the necessary attention, it's not insect proof or anything. It's a macadamia nut. It's just the genetic potential is there to get it higher and better income. And going where the market is going to be more specific and wanting different things, this is giving the farmers a different option to the basket of cultivars, the small basket of cultivars that's readily available. So I just wanted to summarize from my point of view that it's not a silver bullet and manage the expectation, but the expectation is there if you do your bit.
I agree, and 100% with you. And if I can just add, when making comparisons here, the MCT1 in terms of its capacity to produce kernel has outperformed everything else that's grown here.
Yes.
And that's now accepted by the industry per se. In terms of its quality, interestingly, the cultivar that it's generally compared to here, or has been, is 816, because whilst 816 is not a favoured variety here because its performance tapers off dramatically and the tree is very brittle as well, but the kernel that you do get's a lovely kernel. Beautiful. And MCT1 compares favourably with 816.
Oh, okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Good.
Annelie, thanks. Just to wrap it up, maybe go to the
one last question. Just one last question. Just to quickly get back to the pests and diseases. Macadamia felted cosset. is there any specific susceptibility, or is it, can you say it's the same as other macadamia nut varieties?
No, there's nothing specific. I haven't run into any issues with MCT1s being adversely affected by Feltocoxid any more than anything else.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Annelie.
Before we wrap it up, I had a question during the registration that people would like to see macadamia, MCT1 trees. So I'm quickly going to share my screen. I'm just going to run through this presentation with a few pictures, and then we will get back and just say our goodbyes. Okay. So let me just share my screen quickly. So what you can see here, the picture on the left is 3-year-old MCT1 trees, and to your right, 2-year-old MCT1 trees. These are all obviously pictures from Australia that we received courtesy of ANFIC.
I can expand on those pictures. They're taken in the Glasshouse Mountains area. I took those photos, and they are extremely precocious, beautiful young trees, and your TopNut representative will see those trees tomorrow.
Oh, okay, cool.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Brice, there might be more than these 2 pictures taken by you. I received it from ANFIC. So all credit to you and to ANFIC.
Okay.
Thank you for sharing. A 4-year-old MCT1 tree in Gympie. Brice, anything to basically the same picture here?
That is not Gympie. That is Bundaberg.
Oh, is this Bundaberg? Apologies.
Yeah.
I must have, yeah.
Yeah, that photo is taken in Bundaberg. That's at FNC Plantations Orchard at Pine Creek.
And then another 4-year-old tree. Moving on to some older trees. I've got the 18-year-old MCT1 trees here. Brice, can you confirm, is this in Hinkler Park in Bundaberg?
They are the trees at Hinkler Park in Bundaberg. Yep. Those photos were taken when we arrived there and uncovered them after all those years.
Oh. That's good to know. Thanks.
They planted 100 trees in trial, and then everybody forgot they were there until we went and asked the question, and we went over there, and here were these trees with 30 kilos of nuts on them.
Goodness. And this is a comparison MCT1 on the left.
Yep.
And it was A4 on the right.
No, A203, I think.
And 203.
They might be A4s. There is A4s in that block. They could have been A4s, I think. Anyway, it's certainly one of the A's.
And 30-year-old trees at Belmac, if I'm correct.
Yep. Yeah, now these would be Ian's McConaughey's original trees.
The original ones.
They're Ian's original trees. The parent tree for MCT1 is in there somewhere.
Wow. So this is the original.
That's the original plant. They're taken at Wolfeye, yep.
Fantastic. Yeah, just a few pictures.
Yep.
So back to you. Guys, from my side, Werner and Brice, thank you very, very much for your time, the effort, all the information. Brice, for your pictures and your support leading up to this webinar, all the information that you shared with us, which is invaluable. So we really appreciate that. And Werner, a big thank you to you as well. Any last comments?
No, from my side, Brice, I think you can wrap it up. Thank you for your time. I think it's always nice to share info across the ocean, and I really hope that it can keep continuing. Sorry, and all the best that side, and thanks for your time again.
Thank you very much. Look, the time pleases be mine to be able to spread the good word. I mean, we're all about creating an industry that's strong. That's not entirely shared from an official perspective. There is some resistance to sharing new cultivars, but we can probably pull a few little bit of magic out of the cap from time to time to help keep the pot boiling. So it's been a pleasure, and any further information that comes along, we'd be delighted to share that with you.
Thank you very much, everyone. So I want to wish everyone a great day, and the link will be sent out as soon as it's ready. Werner and Brice and everyone else, have a good day.
All the best. Thank you, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.